Hey, in this video, I'm going to take you through my entire editing workflow in Adobe Lightroom. Now, there's loads of ways to go about this, but this is sort of my methodology. And yes, I'm sure most of you know I don't use Lightroom anymore, but it's the most popular editing software, so I thought it'd be more useful if I do it this way. I'm going to do a separate one in the future about how I use Capture One through to Photoshop, but for now, we'll stick to Lightroom. I'm going to dive in. I'm just going to go through every single tab and how I use it for food photography and what I feel is important in food photography and how to just really bring the image to life. So let's jump into the office. We'll get on the computer and I'm going to talk you through it.
Okay, so here we are. We're in Lightroom. This is my image. It's a raw file. It's pretty well exposed. It's not looking too bad, but we're going to up the ante on this a bit. Now, a lot of you searching for this video are probably looking for it because the actual image to start with doesn't look great. Do not panic. I have another video which shows you how to fix complete blunders. But in this one here, I'm actually going to go through my entire workflow. It'll still be relevant to you, but sometimes it's easier to see someone dealing with the same problem that you're dealing with. Now, there's a few things we need to look at here. First of all, presets. Presets are completely pointless. If you ever find me selling presets online, please reference this video because don't ever buy a preset. It is a complete waste of time and money. I can show you how to build your own presets, but it's a pretty pointless task most of the time. There's the odd e-commerce exception to that, but anyway, let's start. I'm digressing. So first thing I do is I look at my camera settings. So this is a 5D Mark II file from 2018. I shot it on a 50mm lens. It wasn't a Tokino. I think it was a Sigma Art or a Canon 1.4, something like that. It was a 1.4 though. 250th of a second, f2.2, 160 ISO. The ISO is important because it tells us what we can do to the sharpening and the clarity. The higher the ISO, the less we can play with sharpening and clarity. The lower, the more we can really bump it up. So let's get rid of all that information now because it's pointless. First thing we do is crop and straighten, and I've actually had a quick play with this because I started a recording and then Moggy jumped onto the desk and headbutted to the microphone, so thought I'd better start again. Now, once we've done that, we take a zoom in and we just have a look around the image, okay? And the whole point of food photography is to make the food look appealing. So we're just having a quick look around for anything. See these little blemishes in the tomatoes that I might want to fix. These tomatoes are slightly out of focus, which is frustrating, but such is life. Maybe these scratches here, maybe we want to keep them in to show the rustic sort of thing. I think these are just bought from Leicester Market. It's not notoriously well known for its good food quality, but this seems to have some half decent food in there the day I went. So first thing we do is the white balance. Now the white balance here is correct. But if it wasn't, we can just adjust it here. We always start with the warmth and the coolness before we move onto the green and magenta tint. And you can see how delicate and fragile the green and magenta is. If you're really stuck, what I would do is go to auto and just see what it pulls you up with, which is actually not too bad. Okay, next up is your exposure. Now with all sliders, I think it's good to go all the way and then pull it back until you go, yeah, that's about right. Okay, contrast, we don't touch contrast. This here is general contrast. This is your basic, this makes the blacks and the whites go apart and together in equal proportions. The chances of that being what you require are very, very slim. The way that we create our contrast is within these little sliders here. If you double click, it puts it back to 0. Good thing to know. This is where we create our contrast. We have our highlights and our whites. The whites are the very top end of the highlights, and the highlights are sort of like the slightly to the right of the histogram. The shadows and the blacks, the shadows are like the mid-range darks, and the blacks are right at the end. Let's open our histogram so we can see what we're doing whilst we're going along. So we're going to start with our highlights. We're going to bang those all up, and you can see they clip, and then we're going to pull them in until they look about right to the eye. About there. And then I'm going to skip shadows and go to the whites. And I press the Alt key down on my keyboard. So I've got pop-ups coming up on my screen, that's annoying. And we push this up, and when it does this, it means they're clipping. If you look there, you can see that's really burning. So just pull it down just below. Likewise with the blacks. We don't want to have loads of crushed blacks. You can do for aesthetic, but I don't think it works in food particularly well. And then the shadows, if you open them up, you've got all of this, but we don't necessarily want to show everything. There we go. Now, there's a backslash key, at least on a Mac keyboard there is. And if you do that, it will show you before and after. So we've gone from here to here. So already we've added a bit of depth, it's a bit of contrast, but without using this contrast slider, you can see +4, +22, -37, -13. They're quite big adjustments, but they're not equal. So using this contrast slider by itself would not have helped here. Now, I don't use the tone curve in Lightroom. We will use this. I'm just going to close a few tabs down so it's clearer what we're working on. Because I'm a chaotic worker. I work in chaos. Right, there we go. So, texture. Let's remove all the texture. And let's zoom into something which will really benefit from texture. And let's start bringing it back until we get to a point where it looks good. There we go. But not overdone. I think up here is quite a nice area. So again, before, after. Now clarity. Clarity will ruin your images. If you go too far this way or too far this way, you have a very bad photograph. With clarity, I go to 100% normally and come backwards. It's just a personal preference, really. And this is kind of like contrast around the pixel. Is the best way I can describe what it does. Lightroom doesn't do a great job with clarity, I'll be honest. If you go into Capture One, it has a far better clarity sort of workflow. And again, before and after, and you can see that punch we've thrown in there. Vibrancy and saturation. Now, do you know what, that clarity is too much. Let's pull it back a bit more. And it's good to keep going back and checking, because before you know it, you've got some horrendous HDR looking images going on. Now, vibrancy. It's rare that we up the vibrancy. It is common that we lower it though. And again, Lightroom doesn't do a great job with this. -5, there we go. I very rarely touch the saturation slider. So this is our basic correction. So we've gone from this it's nice, but it's flat, to something a little bit more punchy at the moment. But we're not done yet. This is just tip of the iceberg. And we may actually end up coming back to this as well. Let's close the basic tab, and go to the detail, and we're going to sharpen our image using the Alt key again. Click on this, and we begin sharpening. And again, let's just zoom in. And then the masking is where we choose exactly around what we sharpen. And I want to come in quite high with that. There we go. And you see up here, this little tab. If we turn this off, that's without, and that's with. And most of these here have their own tabs, apart from basic, where you can turn these little bits off and on. Okay, next up, effects. Now, I love grain. We've sharpened this image, and it's a little bit, I need the sharpness, I need the detail, but I want the grain. So let's add a little bit of grain. And again, Lightroom's not the best for this. Capture One's a lot better. Let's get that grain a little bit bigger, a bit rougher. There we go. If we just turn this off, that's without. So it's very clinical and crisp. Just that little bit of, it's still sharp, but it's just added that bit of warmth almost to the image. So that's all good. Now, we're going to head now to the lens corrections. We're going to go to Profile. We're going to remove chromatic aberrations and enable the profile. Now, I'm pretty sure that this was the Sigma. Where's Sigma? There we go. It's found it. Brilliant. Now, if we turn this off, see that vignette, turn it on, and it's gone. I prefer it off. And I think it's always worth checking these things. Just because it's a correction doesn't mean it's a good correction. And again, we'll just press that back tab just to see that's before, that's after. There we go. Okay. Now, the HSL. This is the most powerful tool in Lightroom, and I genuinely like this. Hue, saturation, and luminance. Now, we don't need to mess around with the hue for this image because my colours are pretty good. We do need to play with this luminance, though, and these greens are a little bit dark for my liking, so we're going to up the greens. Again, if we just turn that off, before and after. And the reds, they could do with a little bit of pop as well. There we go. With the purples, just a little. And we're going to the saturation. And I've got a Canon sensor, so the reds are always heinous. So let's pull those down a bit. I'm going to actually push the greens up a bit. I think Nikon's have like the exact opposite colour profiles coming in. We'll just zoom in to make sure we've not created any weirdness in here. There we go. And again, I'm just going to hit the back key. That's before, and that's after. Now, I feel that we might have overcooked the clarity a little bit at this stage. So I'm going to go back into the basics with the texture. Just reduce that a tad to 20. That's better. It's always good to go back and forth and back and forth. Now, I want to add a vignette, and I believe it's in lens corrections under manual. Oh, we need to turn that back on again. There we go. Let's remove that. Manual. There we go. So I'm going to add a bit of vignette. There we go. Because this floor is not important. I want it there for the context, but it's not an important element in the shot. Now, I don't actually want to correct these bits here, but I'm going to show you just in case you had something in here that you didn't want. Here's what I would do next. If I had these scratches in, I'd done them myself and it looked not great. There's something I do in Photoshop. And before that, I've just noticed something else I want to correct. So ignore me. We're going to get the brush tool out. Now, with all brush tools, less is more. So let's just go down to almost 2/3 of a stop. I just want to bring a little bit of light into these chilies down here because they've sort of fallen by the wayside. Let's open the shadows up, pull the exposure down. There we go. So right click, edit in Adobe Photoshop. Now, there's two different trains of thought here, or schools of thought, more to the point. One is that we do this first, and sometimes this is what I do. I'll give my raw files to the editor. The editor will do all the manual chunky fixing and all that, and then I'll grade afterwards. I like grading my own work. I'm very particular about colors. The other way is to do this and then to edit it. Now, the problem we have here is once we end up in Photoshop, we can't undo the color grading to this version. So, I mean, I'm happy with the color grading here. I'm just going to hit Control J to create a new layer because we always do any adjustments on a new layer. So zoom in. Oh, that's a lot of zoom. There we go. Hit J for the Jesus tool. And this is about the limit of my Photoshop ability. But, just quickly brush these bits out that we don't want. Now, this is somewhat different to my workflow. Obviously, I work with a team. It's very rare that I will retouch an image myself because it's just not my strong point. This is not where my skill set lies. You're probably watching this going, that is some botched editing right there. But it gets the job done. Brute force. There we go. And then, one little bit there. All we do now is close this bit here. Hit save. Then when we come back into Lightroom, here's our CR2. And here is our TIFF. Now this file is going to be a lot bigger, even though it's the same resolution, that has been more... That's annoying. Even though it's the same resolution, it's just more of it, I guess, in terms of file size, because TIFFs are huge compared to CR2s. I've missed a bit of tomato. But you can also come in here. Now this here you can undo and redo. There we go. That's just using the clone tool. But that's pretty much my workflow, and it's pretty simple. I could, if I was editing this without talking through it, it would probably take me under 30 seconds to color grade this. And again, it's a pretty simple image. If we just look at our before, oh, we can't do it now, can we? Of course. Before here, after here. So these are our changes. And it's pretty drastic, but also very subtle. And I think subtlety is the key with these things. You don't want to be going in hard with like extreme changes. There's nothing good in here. Don't ever use, these sorts of things here just won't help you. High contrast and detail, that just looks awful. But there's a lot of photographs out there that look like this. Hopefully this has been of use, and it sort of shows you how to go about editing a photograph from start to finish, what you need, what you really don't need, the thought process and all those little bits that perhaps, knowing the nuts and bolts doesn't always help. Sometimes you actually need to know the why so that when your image is different, you can go, well, the reason we do this today is because of X, Y, and Z. Now, if you're enjoying these videos, do hit subscribe. Do share them with your friends. The more people who see these, the more it helps the channel. The more it helps the channel, the more that I can produce, and we can start to do some more elaborate videos, hopefully going forward.